Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Change is Very Much Possible, my podcast. I'm Alex Deutsch, and I'm so glad to have you here with me again today. For those of you've been listening to me, thank you for your support and for joining me on this journey. We already covered a lot in our first episodes, talking about my personal story, where I come from, the hardships later in life, and so forth. But as I mentioned last time, the theme of this podcast isn't just about sharing, my story. It's about proving to you that change is possible for everyone, no matter where you are in life. Today, we're diving into a big topic, and that is embracing change. Specifically, we are going to talk about fear. That's a problem that many folks experience and deal with. And why fear is one of the biggest obstacles that holds us back from making meaningful shifts in our lives. Now, I am sure some of you are thinking, fear? Isn't that just something we have to deal with? And you're right. Fear is something everyone experiences. So, what I want to talk about today is how fear stops us from acting, on the changes we know we must make. How fear keeps us stuck in situations that aren't serving us at all. And most importantly, how confronting fear is the key to breaking free and making lasting changes. Okay, before we get into all of that, I want to give you a quick recap of what we talked about in episode 1. In that first episode, I shared with you some of my personal journey, how I grew up in communist Romania, the trauma my family experienced during the Holocaust, and the struggles I faced as I left everything behind to start over in a new country. But what I want you to take away from that is the core message: change is always possible, no matter how impossible it seems. Even in the darkest of times, change is something you can choose to pursue. Now, I want to get into today's topic, embracing change. Why is it so hard to make changes in our lives? And why, even when we know something needs to change, do we still hesitate to take that first step? Well, I'll tell you this, I've been there before, and I know what it feels like to feel stuck. To know you're in a bad situation, but not feel like you have a power to change. For me, the hardest part of change wasn't just the fear of the unknown, it was the fear of failure. And I mentioned to you earlier in one of the previous episodes that for me as an engineer, and I'm sure most engineers feel that way, failure is something unacceptable to us. And if we cannot handle it, it becomes, like I said earlier, a lethal problem. So I wasn't sure if I had what it took to change my life. To be honest about that. And I felt that deep in my bones, failure was actually paralyzing me. I know it's hard to believe that, but that's exactly how I felt. So when I first left Romania, when I moved to Israel, when I came to America eventually, it felt like I was taking one step backwards on a continuous basis. And I also felt I was taking one huge leap after another into that fear situation. So every time fear was right there for me, whispering, what if it doesn't work out? What if I can make it? What if I'm just not meant to have a better life? Not good. But there is one thing though, fear doesn't go away. It doesn't just disappear when you take a leap of faith. Fear will always be there. It's a big part of being human. But then the question is this: how do we respond to that fear? So when I moved to Israel, I was entirely new in a new country, surrounded by strangers, learning a new language, which, by the way, was about as different from my old Romanian and Hungarian languages that one could speak. So you can imagine there was a fear over there. What happens if I cannot manage to learn Hebrew? And this caused me fear just about every single day. I had no idea how I would fit in. I find work there ever, or whether I could try, truly to succeed. But right around then, I gave myself a chance. I decided to really give myself a good chance. I chose to take the next step, even if it was very scary. And over time, I learned something powerful. Fear doesn't stop you from changing. It just makes you think twice about changing. But once you push through, that hesitation, that's natural, you realize you're capable of more than you thought. So let me ask you this. What fear is holding you guys back right now? What is that? Maybe it's the fear of not being good enough. Maybe it's the fear of failure. Or maybe it's the fear of the unknown. Whatever it is, I want you to know that fear is very normal. But it doesn't have to control you either. So fear doesn't have to stop you from creating the life that you deserve, the life that you wish for yourselves, that produces you happiness and joy. So let me say this again as strongly as I possibly can. Change is very much possible. But it starts facing your fears. That's the way it works. I'm not saying that it will be easy. I'm not saying it's a one and done kind of a thing. But I can tell you this. Every single time you make the choice to act upon fear, even in the worst case fear that you can imagine, you're one step closer to the life you want for yourself. So that's the reward for you. Okay, in the next part of this episode, I'll share with you how I finally learned to embrace fear and what that, did for me. What was the reaction inside my body, my soul about that? We'll talk about how to take that first step and how, in the end, fear becomes my greatest teacher. I know that sounds like a conflict. Believe me, it doesn't need to be. But before, we get there, take a moment to reflect on your own fears. What's holding you back? And what's the first step you can take today to move forward? All right, my friends, let's dive a little deeper into today's topic. If you've been with me since episode 1, you know that we've touched on fear and change. But now I want to take you even further today, sharing a personal story that I believe is one of the most pivotal moments in my life. This story is about fear. Fear that almost stopped me from making a life-changing decision. Fear that kept me paralyzed for days, weeks, months. I want you to hear it because I want you to understand that fear, as natural as it is, doesn't have to control your choices. You can break free from it. All right, let me take you back to the beginning. When I was 19 years old, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I had already experienced so much growing up under communism in Romania. I've seen my family struggle, heard the whispers of political oppression, and felt the weight of living under a government that controlled every aspect of our lives. But there came a moment when I had the opportunity to leave it all behind and start fresh in a new country. That was my chance to escape Romania, to leave the communist regime, and to find freedom to make something out of myself. It wasn't just a trip across the border, which it was a total reset. I had been given the opportunity to go to Israel and to start a new life, to break free from the chains of fear and oppression that had been ingrained in me for years. But here is where the fear actually started. At first, I was excited. The idea of freedom was exhilarating. The thought of escaping a life where my every move was controlled felt to me at that point like a dream. But as the days passed and the date of my departure grew closer, something shifted. I started to question everything. What if I couldn't make it? What if I failed? What if I didn't fit in? What if I couldn't learn the language? What if I couldn't find a job? As you can see, a lot of what ifs. And those questions crept in like shadows, and with them, a paralyzing fear of failure arrived. It was the kind of fear that made your heart race, your palms sweat, and your mind spin in circles. You see, fear is like that. It comes in at the most inconvenient of times, right when you're on the brink of change. And the worst part of it is, it feels so real. It feels like the truth, like the solid wall that you can get around. You just want to stay where you are, which I felt very strongly, to stay stuck there. After all, the fear of the unknown can be so much scarier than the comfort of the familiar. Even that familiarity is painful many times. So I sat there paralyzed in my room. My suitcase was packed, and yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. My mind was caught in a loop, repeating, what if it all goes wrong? What if this is a huge mistake? Well, it was a battle, I would say, between comfort and change. And I believe at that point, fear was winning. In those moments, I felt hopeless. How could I have lived my home, the place where I've been born and spent my entire life, the place where I understood the rules to survive? But there's one thing that I learned in those days, and I'll never forget it. Fear can paralyze you, but it can't control you unless you let it. So I made my choice. I decided to take the leap. I took that first step, even with the fear swirling around me. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. I walked out of my house, closed the door, and didn't look back. The fear didn't disappear. I chose to move forward, even though I didn't know what awaited me on the other side. When I arrived in Israel, it was quite overwhelming. The language was foreign. The culture was so different. I didn't know anyone. But in that moment, I realized something so important. Fear is not the enemy. It's the willingness to face it that makes all the difference, actually. So I was sick. I was scared, as you might imagine. I had moments of doubt, wondering if I had made the right decision. But the more I learned into that fear, the more I understood how to deal with it. Every new experience, every new challenge pushed me further into the growth. I faced the fear of failure and the fear of not measuring up. But each time I confronted that fear, I grew stronger. I learned more about myself and more about the world around me. Now, I'll be honest with you, there were days when I wanted to pack and go back home. When everything felt too much to handle. But there was this spark inside me that wouldn't let me quit. I remembered what I left behind in Romania. Remembered the dreams I had of freedom and the better life I wanted to create. And I knew that if I went back now, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I kept moving forward, little by little, day by day. The fear became something I could control. The more I faced it, the smaller it seemed. And eventually I realized that fear is a natural part of my life. It's a part of change. But here is the key. It doesn't have to control your life. Now, there's something I want you to understand. Fear never really goes away. It's always going to be there, lurking in the background. But you can learn to face it. You can choose to take that first step, even when the fear feels overwhelming. And here's the thing, the more you take that step, the easier it gets. The more you lean into fear, the less power it has over you. And that is what I learned when I moved to Israel. I learned that the only way through fear is through it. You don't have to wait for the fear to disappear. You don't have to wait until you feel completely ready for it. You just have to take that first step and trust that the rest will follow. And this lesson didn't just apply to living in Romania, it applied to every major decision I made in my life. Moving to America, starting over again, starting my career. Even after all these years, fear still shows up. But now I see it for what it is. A sign that I'm on the edge of something new, something worth pursuing. You see, in my life, I faced so many fears. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of unknown. But each time I moved through that fear, I became stronger, and I believe you can do just the same. Now, I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Think about the changes you want to make. Maybe it's something big, like moving to a new country or changing careers. Maybe it's something smaller, like starting a new habit or overcoming, a fear that's been holding you back. Whatever it is, I want you to ask yourself this question. What is the fear that is stopping you? What's the worst thing that could happen if you took that first step? And remember, you don't have to do it perfectly. Just have to do it. Because every step forward, no matter how small, brings you closer to the life you want. In the end, it's not about getting rid of fear. It's about learning to move through it. Fear is going to be there, but it doesn't have to stop you. And once you realize that, once you accept that fear, it's just a part of your journey. You'll find that change is very much possible for you, for me, for anyone willing to face their fears heads on. Now, thank you for listening to today's podcast. In the next one, we're going to dive deeper into the power of forgiveness, both forgiving others and, just as importantly, forgiving ourselves. I think you'll find it incredibly powerful, so please stay tuned.